my clock on here, so I think we probably will get going. Tom, can you give me a shout when we're online? So, okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the West Devon Borough Council Hub Committee. Okay, we'll press on with the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. I've had none. Mr. White?
Neither have I, thank you, Leader.
Okay, I'm expecting Councillor Pearce to be here, so he may well have got delayed and be arriving shortly. We'll move on. Declarations of interest. Members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests, including the nature and extent of such interest they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Are there any declarations of interest, members? I've got nothing coming forward. Welcome, Councillor Pearce. That's okay, good to see you.
Gentleman from Fusion outside if we need it.
Councillor Pearce, we've just been dealing with declarations of interest. So if you have any, if you would like to make any declarations now.
No.
Thank you. Item 3, items requiring urgent attention. I've been notified of none.
Neither have I, thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. White. Item 4, confirmation of minutes. If we can have a look at the minutes, last meeting, members, and just check those for accuracy and completeness. Anything that anyone would like to raise on page 1 of those minutes? Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. And page 5. In which case, Mr. White, I think we'll take those as being a complete and accurate record of the meeting. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Leader.
Agenda item 5, if I can get to it, is public questions. I've not been notified of any public questions, Mr. White.
That's correct, thank you, Leader.
Thank you. And item 6, Hub Committee Forward Plan. So members, you have in front of you the Hub Committee Forward Plan in its usual format. Just really checking through here for accuracy and completeness, and if there's anything we need to be amending or adding. Councillor Pearce has pointed out one anomaly to me, that an item that's on the agenda meeting for today has been listed as being presented by Councillor Daniel, but it is actually Councillor Pearce who will be presenting it. Anything else that anybody would like to raise in terms of the forward plan? I've not got anything coming forward, Mr. White, so I think we can accept the forward plan as given. So agenda item 7, members, draft revenue and capital budget proposals. You have in front of you the papers relating to the budget proposals for 2022-23 and the appendices numbered lettered A to F. As usual, I think an excellent report, and my thanks are due to Mrs. Buckle and her team for putting those together for us. The report is asking Hub to make a number of recommendations to Council at the next Council meeting on the 15th of February. Clearly, we've looked at this several times, and the report has been discussed at Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 18th of January. We all know the backstory and how this arrangement fits into our medium-term financial strategy. So what I would like to do is just highlight changes since our last discussion. At our last Hub meeting on the 7th of December, we reported a proposed gap of £40,000 in the knowledge that the local government finance settlement was due on or around the 16th of December. That has now been received, And although disappointingly only for 1 year, the report contains some good news, which is set out in the report in the executive summary and in section 3. Notably, a higher than expected lower tier services grant and a new services grant for 2022-23 only, worth £113,606. And those have enabled us to close that gap. That, coupled with the revision of our estimated council tax base, has changed the position, and despite additional cost pressures now included in the figures of £30,000 for IT support costs and £25,000 to be added to the JLP earmarked reserve, this has enabled the council to balance the budget and to make a contribution to our financial stability earmarked reserve of £163,850. Members will also note that the figures now include a proposal to make the post of the rough sleeper outreach worker a permanent one, funded from our homelessness grant, a proposal that I welcome. The figures also include at 3.28 a higher than anticipated receipt of new homes bonus funding of £352,000. Draft budget proposals have assumed that £150,000 from the new homes bonus would fund the revenue budget and £30,000 would fund the capital programme set out in Appendix D. It's proposed that these remain unchanged, but that the balance of this income of £172,084 is used to fund an affordable housing earmarked reserve for 2022-23 in recognition of the current housing crisis and to be used to fund projects to help alleviate that crisis. It is recognised that much uncertainty remains around the medium-term financial strategy, with a predicted budget gap of some £450,000 for 23-24 outlined in section 2.6. Much of the uncertainty around this figure is related to the potential imposition of a negative rate support grant, which will again be under review in the Fair Funding Review and the Business Rates Reset. This is set out in section 3.13. In anticipation of having to deal with that, the Resources Advisory Group is already working with the Section 151 officer to put plans in place to reduce that shortfall. It's worth noting in this report, as outlined at section 3.36, that this year's figures include £122,000 of spending to enable the plan for West Devon to be delivered. This is in addition to existing resources which have been refocused and reprioritised. The MTFS also includes £168,000 for this purpose in 23-24. As part of this balanced budget, and in order to maintain our income base at a time of future uncertainty, the proposals include an intention to increase West Devon Council tax for a Band D property by £5 per annum to £246.63. This means that a Band D household will pay less than 10p a week extra, or £4.74 per week for the services that West Devon Borough Council provides. Whilst I appreciate that any increase at the present time may be unwelcome, this equates to an increase of 2.1% and is some way below current inflation rates. Members will note the recommendations set out in full on pages 11 and 12 of the report, which summarise the points I've highlighted today and our previous discussions. I'd be very pleased at this point, members, to take any questions that you might have. Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering about the ongoing wage negotiations with our staff. And as you've just alluded to, inflation is now running at 5.4%. I'm wondering how we're going to include that in our budget, because obviously we cannot be giving them wage rises that are below inflation, because that's essentially a wage cut. So I'm just wondering how that's going to be negotiated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The wage negotiations are a matter of national negotiation with the employers' bodies. I don't know whether the Chief Exec is able to update us at all with progress on those, because I think it has reached a bit of an impasse at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. That's correct. A final offer has been made by the national negotiation team. That's been rejected. Unison have balloted their members and they have not achieved sufficient members participating in that ballot for the result to stand. Further industrial action is being proposed by other unions through ballot, and we're waiting to hear the outcome of that in terms of Unite. We have set aside money within our budget which anticipates the final award, and we're confident the budget allocation is sufficient to cover that. Thank you, Chairman.
I think with regards, Councillor Daniel, to your wider inquiry, that will be a matter for national negotiation, and we will take appropriate advice and I'm sure build that into our medium-term financial strategy in due course. Thank you for that. Any other questions from members present? In which case, I think we have a question from Councillor Ewing.
Good afternoon, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to ask a couple of questions. One of my questions is, as an ordinary little householder who lives on her own, my gas and electric bills have gone up by over 50% recently. Have we allowed within the budget, because I can't see, for the ever increasing rising costs of utility bills that will affect us? My other question then goes back to, as life hopefully goes back to more normality, have we allowed for travel expenses? Because, you know, as we know, everything has gone up around travel as well. And those are my questions. Thank you, Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Councillor Ewings. I wonder, Mrs. Buckle, would you be able to answer the specifics of that inquiry?
Yes, thank you, Leader. So yes, on page 35 of the budget report, within the cost pressures, we have included 70,000 for inflation on goods and services. So that would allow us to increase some of the budgets that we've got around utilities. We feel that's sufficient at the moment. And that's the amount that we've budgeted for. With regards to travel, in the last budget monitoring report, which we took to the Hub Committee, we did actually think that there would be a small saving on staff and member travels expenses, and in the current year 21-22 we expect that to be about £30,000. So we think that that will probably carry on into 22-23. So again, we don't feel there's anything we need to change the budget for at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Buckle. I hope that helps, Councillor Ewings.
Yeah. Councillor Jury, sorry. What percentage is that 70,000 on our current bills against going forward? I think that's the bit I was trying to get at more is, you know, we know that people's bills are going up 50-60%. Is that what we've allowed for as well? 70,000 doesn't make much sense when you don't know what it's based on. Sorry, Mrs. Buckle.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. No, sorry, I don't think my microphone is on. Normally, we allow for things like utilities. We would allow between 5 and 10%, but we would look back at what we're currently spending as well. So when we're monitoring those budgets, that 70,000, we would have looked at, for example, our water bills or our electricity bills, gas, and what we are paying on things like repairs and maintenance as well. So again, that's really enough to bring up the budgets to what we think we're probably going to need in 22-23. Does that help?
Thank you, Mrs. Buckle. Does that help, Councillor Ewing?
Yes, it does. But as we all know, it's a huge worry for all of us.
I agree entirely. Thank you. Any other questions, members? In which case, members, I'd like to move the recommendations, which are shown in full on page 11 and 12, and their recommendations from Roman numerals 1 through to Roman numerals 12. If I could move those en bloc. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second those.
Thank you. Members, any debate? Councillor Cheadle.
Yes, thank you. I think we say this every year, but this year is sort of going to be absolutely no different, but probably equally or more pertinent. It falls to us as a council to issue the bills, as it were, and this year there are going to be some nasty surprises, not just in the council tax bill, but given what's happening in the general sort of cost of living rise, and as Councillor Ewins mentioned, the inflation on fuel rates. So I think it behoves us, when we do come to announce this decision at the council meeting in a fortnight's time, to be well prepared with a piece for publication on the challenges we face. The fact that our council tax is but a small part of the total bill that lands on people's doormats, and how we're sort of constraining costs to the taxpayer as much as we possibly can. I know we do this every year. This year's no different, but this year is a bit different because the inflationary pressures on everyone are considerably greater than they have been in the past.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. I think that's really helpful, and I think we're all too aware that that is the case, and we continue to strive to make sure that we can deliver value for money across the board. So thank you for that. Any other debate, members? In which case we'll move to a vote. So all in favour of the proposals?
That's 9 unanimous for 12 recommendations. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. The next item on the agenda is public consultation on homeless strategy. If I could hand over to Councillor Ratcliffe to introduce this item. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you very much, Leader. This report seeks to make the consultation process as engaging as possible, with the aim to increasing the housing provision in this borough. The draft strategy will cover the many activities we undertake to prevent homelessness and the need of special groups. I would like to ask Sophie Cobbledick, who was the author of this report, if she will lead members through the report and take members' questions at the end. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, councillors.
I would be very happy to go over the report, but it might be simpler to just discuss the sort of fundamentals of it, which are that it's a legal requirement for all local authorities to have a homelessness strategy. And part of that requirement is that we consult to ensure that our strategy addresses local issues. The strategy itself, we believe, addresses the local issues based on our professional understanding, and the purpose of the consultation is to check that we are not missing anything and that professionals and the public have a chance to comment on the content of the strategy and make any suggestions for changes or additions that they may feel is necessary. Does anybody have any sort of desire for me to go through the report in full, or is everyone happy?
No, I think we're fine with that, Mrs. Cobbledick. We've had the report, so members will have read it. Are there any questions that we have for Councillor Ratcliffe or Mrs. Cobbledick while we have them here available to us? Councillor Cheadle.
I've just got one question. It's probably a blindingly obvious question, so forgive me for it. But I was looking at the figures on rough sleepers. And rough sleepers in West Devon in particular, and the report says there were 36. Is that people that tonight are sleeping on the street or somewhere not in a shelter?
So the figure 36 seems oddly high because you don't see 36 over the course of a year. That figure is made up of people who are rough sleeping, actually rough, as you say, bedding down outside, and people who are at high risk of doing so. So we implement an approach called No Second Night Out, which we very generously occasionally make no first night out because it's morally the right thing to do. The guidance is around identifying people who are at high risk of ending up rough sleeping, and ensuring you put in procedures and sort of fail-safes at an early stage to prevent them from needing to. So that's why the figure seems higher than what your perception may be in your area.
Throwing me to ask the question. So rough sleepers aren't necessarily people that are sleeping rough. They're people that might be sleeping rough if a solution wasn't available.
Yes, or may have slept rough for just one night and then been brought in, or may have rough slept in other areas and have been brought in, or people who are have been successfully sofa surfing for a short period, but actually their sort of sofa options have run out. So particularly somewhere like here, where we're so close to Dartmoor, it can be very, very cold. So any risk that there is to somebody who, where we genuinely believe they may have nowhere to stay that evening, we would class them as at high risk of rough sleeping, and then we would put things in place to alleviate that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just going to drag it out one second. Tonight, how many people do you think will be sleeping out in the open in West Devon?
None.
And that's a pretty typical figure.
Yes.
So your rough sleeping strategy is working because there aren't any rough sleepers.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a point that's worth clarifying, and it's a testament to the success of the strategy. Any other questions, members? Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, what is our strategy going to be to ensure the public know that we're carrying out a consultation so that we get a really good response? Thanks.
Our comms team are working really hard to make sure that it's quite high profile on Facebook and all the other social media platforms we're in. It will have links that take you directly to our website, which then has the sort of a brief overview of the content of the strategy, and then has a number of questions with a final sort of open-ended question as well, to give people the opportunity to comment on the content. I believe we're also looking to do a press release that draws people's attention to it as well.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? In which case, Councillor Ratcliffe, would you like to move the recommendation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to move the recommendation to be found on page 51 of this report, which is namely that the Hub agrees to commence public consultation on the draft homeless strategy 2022 to 2027.
Thank you, Councillor. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Mott, thank you. Members, we're into debate. Any debate on this issue? I think it's all very... Oh, Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. I'm very pleased that for the clarification on the numbers that were indicated in the report. So I thank Councillor Cheadle for bringing that forward. This is quite a important consultation, so we need to make sure that as many people respond to it as possible, because a number of economists have stated that there will be 4 interest rate increases this year. And I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on people who have already got tight finances due to high mortgages. So we need to be, in a position that we can act as quickly as possible if that should happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and the consultation will be a really important part of that response. So, any other debate, members? In which case, we'll move to a vote. All in favour of the recommendation?
Thank you, Leader. That's unanimous.
Thank you, members. If we can move on now, members, to item 9 on the agenda, which is headed the Q3 Integrated Performance Management Report. So the report that's in front of you represents progress made on developing a performance management report. This is an immediate follow-up to our agreement of a plan for West Devon and the thematic delivery plans that followed. It's our first attempt to report back on progress, and I think will prove to be a useful report for lead members and advisory groups in particular, so that all members can be kept informed of progress and be able to hold lead members and officers to account about delivery of the plan. The plan also includes references to budget spend, the report also includes references to budget spend and outlines the next steps for the coming year. And so will, I think, be really useful and helpful in keeping our focus on delivering the plan. As such, it's an invaluable guide to progress and will inform future discussions. I'm really grateful to Mr. Hawke for overseeing the process and for the input in particular of Councillor Edmonds and the senior leadership team. You'll note that KPIs are yet to be added as part of the next phase, and they will follow in due course. In the meantime, I hope the reports will be useful to lead members, advisory groups and others in following the progress of our plan. Members, are there any questions about the report that's in front of you? Councillor Cheadle.
It's a detailed question. I should say a question on a detail, not a detailed question. It's also a plea that we think about the language that we're using. I think to a lay member, a report entitled, as this one is, the Integrated Performance Management Report, probably doesn't mean a great deal. If it was a plan for West Devon, how are we doing? Might mean a bit more. So I ask that we strive to try and get management speak out of our reports if we possibly can. And as a tiny example of that, in the section 1, performance on a page, on the right-hand top box, it says there is an underspend primarily due to delays in onboarding new employees. Onboarding. Is that recruiting? Might it say recruiting?
It is a term which I think means quite a bit more than recruiting, but yes, I take your point entirely.
Make my point?
I think you do make your point. I did say this was our first attempt at it, and I'm all in favour of reducing management speak and making these things accessible. And I think we will note your point, Councillor Cheadle, which is well made. Any other questions, members? In which case, I will move to the recommendation. Get back to it. So the recommendation is that the Hub Committee note the progress the Council have made in delivering against the Year 1 plan for West Devon Thematic Delivery Plan, the programme's financial performance and the current strategic risk profile of the Council. Could I have a seconder for the recommendation, please?
Happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Members, any debate?
I'd just like to thank Mr. Hawke, actually, for a fantastic effort to condense this down to something that looks good and feels good and is, despite my criticism of some of the language, relatively easy to assimilate. It's a great start. It's obviously the first go, so some of the stuff is missing and other stuff will need a degree of sort of finessing as we go through, but it's a really good start. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. I'm sure that's much appreciated. And as you say, it is the first go. I'm sure it will develop and finesse into something that is really useful. And in some ways, it's been the thing that's been missing perhaps from some of our strategic objectives in the past, is that ability to come back and just see where we are with delivery and importantly, what the next steps are. So I think that's really important. So yeah, I'd echo those thanks, Mr. Hawke. Thank you. Any other debate, members? In which case we'll move to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendation?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Doing really well today. Thank you, members.
Mr. Brooks just walked in.
Thank you. If we could move to item 10 on the agenda, which is the Fusion Lifestyle Leisure Contract Support Update. And if I could ask Councillor Leach to introduce this item. Councillor Leach.
Thank you. This report provides an update on current performance levels, the recovery and the business impact within the contract and proposed contract variations so as to mitigate those impacts. It recommends the future management fee profile is adjusted to reflect the impact of the pandemic. These changes do not vary the total management fee due over the contract period, which remains the same. So the impact is one of timing, cash flow and revenue income from the management fee payable. An independent consultant was commissioned to report on the proposals and provide a view as to their relative merits, the state of the market and the bigger picture strategy options. The report is included in the appendices. Investing and supporting public leisure facilities is an investment in health prevention, and leisure centres are essential as a community hub, significantly contributing to improving people's health and well-being. Excuse me. Appendix 8 says that the new proposed management fee, there would be a 58,639 shortfall in income of the management fee for 2021/22. It is recommended to fund this shortfall from the COVID losses earmarked reserved in 21/22. And from 22/23 onwards, the proposed management fee income would be in excess of the current budgeted income level as detailed again in Appendix A. Information on operational cleaning and testing matters are also included following a request for further information from the Hub Committee that goes back to November the 2nd, 21. I'd like to leave that there, but I'd like to ask Mr. Brooke if there's anything else he wants to add to this. And I assume if we were going to talk about anything in some of the appendices, we'd have to go into part 2.
Thank you, members. No, at this time, I think that's an excellent introduction, and I'm here if there are any questions as we get into more detail. And I'd also just like to add for your benefit that I'm delighted that Peter King is here from Fusion. So if he is able to present to you today the latest information they have in terms of performance and usage, which in no way impacts the decision that's before you, but is useful to hear if you'd like to at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooke. That's helpful. Members, any questions? Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just check before I ask the question. It is from the body of the report, not from the appendix. It's around paragraph 6.1, which refers to the contract variation regarding the management fees. So I hope that's not a part 2 point. So really, yeah, it says recommend to council the contract variation and changes to the management fee profile as set out in Appendix 8. Fine. My question is there any form of review within that contract to review that management fee, on an annual basis, just as we can be satisfied that the Fusion, the recovery, hopefully is, better than perhaps expected. Maybe there is an option for the council to renegotiate the management fee on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Is that a question for Mr. Brooke or?
or Mr. Buckle.
Or Mrs. Buckle. Looks like it's Mr. Brooke from here.
I think I've caught the button. Thank you, Councillor Edmonds and Chairman. So I think the answer to your question is that there is. It's not quite as black and white as that, however. So there is a minimum position, which is the one that's set out for you. And then there is an agreement with Fusion that if they exceed that point, then that will flow in our direction, recognising that the management fee has been effectively deducted in a cash flow basis. So that will form part of the variation.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Edmonds?
Yes.
So, and I think whilst we're on the subject of questions and whilst we have Mr. King here, I think it would actually be really helpful to hear from Mr. King about where things are with Fusion. I'd certainly note that I visited Meadowlands a few weeks ago and I was suitably impressed with the efforts that were being made and a number of the staff there that were going online and leaving messages online on Facebook and so on about trying to encourage people to come back and take part in the activities that are taking place. Things did seem to be really moving in the right direction. And I think anecdotally I've heard that Oakhampton Parklands is the same, that people are responding well. So it would be really interesting just if we may ask you the question as to how things are going at the moment and your perception of that.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. And thanks for allowing me to speak today. That's superb. I think the first thing to say is we all recognise it's been an incredibly challenging year. It's not just been challenging in leisure, hospitality, retail, all those things. So it has been incredibly challenging. If we think back, we opened back after the first lockdown in April, 12th of April. Restrictions then got further released on the 19th of July. And then from then, we've been increasing in participation and growth. One thing to mention, we are still operating below 2019 figures. So we are still very much in a recovery phase and improving month on month. December was particularly challenging, what with the threats of potential lockdowns, with the new Omicron variant. But I'm pleased to say that was a bit of a blip in terms of the recovery, because as at November, we were on a continued increased direction with increased participation, increased membership, increased on income, so all was moving in the right direction. What I will say is we've also had a very positive January. So we've had over sort of 600 members join us for the January period. There seems real confidence back in the market at the moment. We're finding a real return to activities that people had done from 2019. We're also seeing much more of a hybrid in fitness where people are still doing things online, but are wanting the social contact within the centres as well. On top of that, you'll see our programs have been growing, our opening hours have been growing, our attendance figures are also growing. So the early news at the moment is whilst we're trading below 2019 numbers, we have had a very positive start to 2022. There seems real consumer confidence back in the market. There are things from an operational point of view that we need to do work on and change as our participation continues to grow. But generally, we are on the right path, and it looks like a good start to 2022.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful to hear. So I appreciate you coming and imparting that knowledge to us. If I could just say, if you could take our appreciation of the efforts that staff are making back to them and pass that on to them. And Councillor Cheadle has a question.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's really good news to hear that. My question really is whether you're vulnerable to the anticipated hike in energy prices, or how vulnerable you are.
The answer is yes. And the reason for that is the hike in energy prices. We're a large consumer of gas, electricity and water. And we are open to that 30% increase. Now, some sites are seeing a higher increase. There's twofold that we've done to mitigate that. One is we've had to review our pricing levels and act accordingly around that, which has helped us secure some of our sort of income levels. The other is we are working on energy management. So we're looking at the centres currently to see where we can save energy, where we can bring in other options. And the third prong to that is around the electricity and looking at renewable sources such as solar energy. So we're trying to mitigate some of those factors, but it is very much a factor on the centres.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? In which case, if I could ask Councillor Leach to move the recommendations.
Yes, I would like to move the recommendations found on page 97. They are, 1, note the performance of Fusion contract date, wider market trends and financial information on Fusion's performance in 2021, as first reported at its 2nd November 2021 meeting. 2, recommend to Council the contract variation and changes to the management fee profile as set out in Appendix A, brackets table 1 and 3. Recommend to Council to fund the £58,639 shortfall in income of the management fee in 2021 from the COVID losses earmarked reserve in 2021-22.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Could I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Members, any debate? Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to be reassured that Fusion are managing to get the numbers back into the centres and that residents are using them. I'm not getting so many moans about the cleanliness and the service that I was before, so hopefully that's something that has been put behind them now. So it will be interesting to see how Fusion continue to make the most of getting residents within and using the centres, and also for the residents to make the use of the centres also. We have been lucky to be able to keep the centres going. Not so many councils have been able to do that, and I know certainly there's a lot of discussions with some councils as to whether they're going to even keep some of their centres. So I think my plea would be to the residents to use the centres and to make the most of them while we are able to support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. That's noted. Any other debate, members? In which case we'll move to a vote. So all those in favour of the recommendations?
That is unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Members, if we could move to item 11 on the agenda, which is natural woodland regeneration at council sites. If I could ask Councillor Daniel to please introduce this item. Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, I'm really pleased to be introducing this natural regeneration project on West Devon sites. It's an opportunity for this council to make a positive and significant change to our natural environment. So this project is a key action in the Natural Environment West Devon Plan as agreed by full council in September 2021 to create new woodlands. The aim is to increase our biodiversity across West Devon by 10% in the next 3 years. We plan to achieve this partly by natural regeneration of 2 identified sites owned by West Devon Borough Council. Both sites are priority natural areas. These are a site at Harrowby of 4+ hectares and a site at Bedford Bridge of 3+ hectares. The site at Bedford Bridge has been used for grazing in the past, but has not been used for a few years now and is already showing signs of natural regeneration. The other site has been out on lease at £14 a year for grazing. The tenant has been given a year's notice, so the council will recover it in September 2022. Both sites are not good grazing and both have a lot of bracken and growth on already, so showing signs of natural regeneration on their own. We have had advice from the Woodland Trust who've advised that because of these sites where they are, it is best to pursue a policy of natural regeneration rather than deliberately planting trees. The reasons for this are that trees that regenerate naturally are more likely to survive. They require no plastic and staking and maintenance as trees would be if we had planted them, although we will maintain the area and continue to look at it. Once the trees are established, we thought we might be able to give public access to one of the sites, but neither site has good access. One is across the bridge, which has no public footway, so it's not safe to walk on it, and the other one has only private land accessing it. So and natural sites do better if they are undisturbed. So, but we could look at that again as a council in the future if you felt it might be relevant. And the other thing I'd like to point members to is that these sites will provide some carbon capture, so allow us to meet our net zero target in 2030. And there are also potential to register under the Carbon Woodland Code and either sell carbon credits or use it to offset the council's carbon deficits. So the report asks that members note the proposed way forward to deliver natural woodland regeneration at council-owned sites at Harrowby Lane, Yelverton, and Bedford Bridge near Horrobridge. So, any questions?
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions, members? Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned that some maintenance is proposed. Can I ask what maintenance and management of the land is going to be proposed, please?
I think the costs of these, would be met by, we would apply for a grant, which would be £7,000 initially and then £500 a year to cover the costs. I'd ask Mr. Sekula as manager of our maintenance team to explain what would be needed.
Thanks. Good afternoon, members. In terms of maintenance, it does depend entirely on what comes up in terms of natural regeneration and how the trees respond. In their early years, I would probably anticipate it would be some bracken management. There is a bit of bracken on one of the sites. Bracken and trees tend to like the same sort of soil, so we will, to a degree, be competing against a little bit of bracken that's at the site. Topping of that bracken, I would expect. On the other site, there's no bracken at all, so I don't really expect any maintenance costs there at all. So minimal to nothing in terms of ongoing maintenance if we take the natural regeneration approach. If we do have to do a bit of whip planting, then there would be annual checks of those tree whips and redoing the plastic spirals, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Mott?
If I could, please. A lot of studies have shown that natural regeneration doesn't actually work because of the thick sward of grass that then effectively produces a mat that none of the trees or seeds can get a grip into, and also with the cover of bracken, etc. And if you can have a lot of bramble growth, for example, that it's very difficult for trees and for shrubs to be able to get a foothold in, whereas conservation grazing is usually seen as a better solution because the light poaching of the ground allows seeds to come into contact with the ground. You end up then with the bracken, etc., being grazed off and trees being allowed to establish much more easily. Is that something that we've considered?
Yes, so certainly conservation grazing isn't something which generally works well with natural regeneration or young trees either, if you do formally plant them. Sheep, ponies, cattle, they'll all trample young trees. It's better to have them off the land. In an ideal world, we put deer fence in there and effectively the land would then be untouched. Through natural regeneration, you do get various stages, so the grass will grow long, you will get establishment of bramble, or even bracken, you get establishment of scrub, and finally, after all of that, you do get your tree cover. So It's a succession-led approach, which does take some years, but it does work, and I've seen evidence of it working, and it's the favoured approach, certainly, of the Woodland Trust currently. And the Forestry Commission do, for the first time, recognise it under their new grant scheme. So I'd suggest moving forward, you'll see a lot more of this type of approach, and it probably will become the norm.
I have a further question, if I may, Chair. Can you give us some indication as to what value with the carbon credits that land will give us?
Yeah, so I've done some calculations, well, basic calculations, I'd say, which I'd summarised in section 4.6. Bear with me, at least I think I did. Yeah, so I worked out the credits would be worth about £6,000 per site, give or take. So slightly more if we went down the formal tree planting route, in so much as you can then take a more accurate forecast of the sort of carbon that you're likely to sequester, whereas natural regeneration, you obviously get less. Problem being, and the reason I've suggested that I would anticipate we'll go down a partnership approach with the Woodland Trust, is that to actually do the paperwork and the administration on the Woodland Carbon Code, it's massively excessive. So I would anticipate that it would cost us about £18,000 to do the admin on the paperwork compared to £6,000 worth of credit. Whereas if we go down the route of partnering with the Woodland Trust, we wouldn't be able to put the carbon against our own carbon footprint, but the Woodland Trust would take on the admin of administering the scheme and pay us a sum for the carbon that we will sequester at that site. So it seems completely illogical. We're almost in a better position to just buy the carbon that's being sequestered elsewhere and let the Woodland Trust worry about it on our own site. But from the maths that I've done and the advice that I've had, that seems to be the most sensible way forward.
Thank you. Was that helpful, Councillor Mott? Councillor Crozier.
Thank you, Leader. It's quite interesting, actually, because I'm involved with the AONB FIPL panel. For those who don't know what FIPL is, it's farming in the protected landscapes of the Tamar Valley. We've had a number of applications from landowners, mainly smallholders, but some bigger owners as well, including the National Trust, and doing exactly similar things. And in fact, the advice that we've been given today is somewhat contrary to the advice that we've been getting. We have a member of the Woodland Trust, Rosie Woodworth, who sits on the panel. Brambles are good because they help keep the deer out. Bracken is good because it helps keep the deer out and other animals out, and the trees can flourish. And once they get above the bracken, the trees kill all the bracken. So there is a lot of conjecture around here, and I think, really speaking, what we really want to be doing is considering what trees we want to grow on these plants. Are they going to be trees that are going to be any use at all at the end of the day, other than firewood, or even firewood? Because I think all woodland, there is a commercial take at the end of the life of the trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crozier. Any comments, Mr. Secura, or would you like to take some more questions?
Not really on that point. I think we're probably on a similar page in terms of the benefits of bramble and bracken. The advice I've had so far from Woodland Trust and Forestry Commission is that we literally let the land just crack on as is. It's I think Chris described it as an easy brief when I first mentioned this to him. We do very little with the land. We just leave it well alone, which I suspect is similar to what the Woodland Trust have been saying via FIPL.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle, you have a question.
Yeah,